Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah pada minggu ini kita bertemu sekali lagi di dalam sesi Weekly Booster 15M. Bagi yang pertama kali bersama-sama dengan sesi ini, sesi Weekly Booster 15M adalah sesi yang dikelas untuk membolehkan sesiapa sahaja untuk berkongsi bahan bacaan dalam masa 15 minit. Jadi pada minggu ini kita sangat bertuah kerana kita akan berkongsi mengenai buku Outliers dan bersama-sama dengan kita adalah AKMAR. Assalamualaikum AKMAR.
Waalaikumsalam.
Okay, untuk pengetahuan semua saya kenalkan dulu AKMAR, siapa background sikit dan sebagainya. AKMAR is a freelance early interventionist and teletherapist who is also a New York State Certified Teacher of the Deaf and Reading Specialist. She obtained her master's degree at Teachers College, Columbia University, and upon graduation, she worked at the New York School for the Deaf for a year. AKMAR used to work as an education development officer in an NGO for the deaf and together with her team, they introduced the first Malaysian sign language online course in the world. Congratulations, AKMAR and team.
Thank you.
Prior to doing her postgraduate studies, AKMAR was an English teacher for 4 years in Sempurna, Sabah. Probably you want to share with the viewers on the site to actually look into the sign language online course.
Oh yeah, so basically we developed this course back in 2019 and this course is available on Open Learning. So Open Learning is like Coursera and edX or something like that, yes. And you can, the link is actually openlearning.com/Malaysian Sign Language. Yes, and they have a promotion right now. It's only 100 ringgit for the whole course.
So bagi sesiapa yang bersama dengan kita hari ini, please grab the chance kalau kita nak belajar sign language. Jadi kalau saya kira AKMAR agak bersesuaian lah untuk bercerita tentang buku ini. So we straight to the point on this book. Probably AKMAR, you can talk a bit about who is Malcolm and what makes he wrote that book, and his background influence the way he wrote this book.
Yeah, okay, so Malcolm Gladwell, I actually first read his book, I think it was called Blink. That was the first book that I read. In that book, he was talking about how people make decisions without realizing. So it's like your brain subconsciously make decisions, right? And then it is only after you think about it and it's like, oh, okay, why did I say what I said, or why did I make the decision that I made? So that's where I got interested in his books. And since then, I've been reading all of his books, 6 books that he has. He's an author with, he's actually a journalist. He used to write for the Washington Post and currently he writes for the New Yorker. And recently he launched a podcast. I haven't listened to it, but it's called Revisionist History, basically talking about history events, but from a different perspective or a different kind of explanation of the historical events. Yeah, so what makes him write the book, The Outliers? Well, I searched for it basically, and he said, so basically he was like having he met like a few lawyers, and then he was thinking about like, oh, why is it they are all the same guy, meaning to say they have the exact same background, they are close in age, and they are all successful. So this is where he started sort of like researching or studying about it's not just about how do people become successful, but what is it that makes them successful? What are the factors that make them successful? Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Akma, for that brief introduction. So then we want to know a little bit further on this book. What is the theme of this book as compared to the other 2 books before this, Blink and also The Tipping Point? And probably you want to share a bit some of his analysis on how certain people can achieve success or not. What are the determinations and what actually he wrote in that book?
Yeah, so basically, well, he started off with the hockey league basically in Canada. Of course, we're not familiar with like the ice hockey thing, but I think his analysis is interesting because he was looking at the ages of the people in the team, and he found that almost almost the majority, I wouldn't say almost, but the majority, more than half of the players were actually born in January, February, and March. And it was because the cutoff age for them, in order for them to be selected, for example, to go to into junior league and then they move up, is 1st January. It's just like our school system. 1st January is our cutoff date, meaning to say, if you are born the year before, let's say you go into school at the age of 7. So kalau if you were born in December, for example, some parents choose not to let their child go into standard 1 that year because, December born. So it's like it's not that you miss, but you are sort of like a year behind in terms of age compared to those who are born in January, for example. And we might not see that as maybe something significant. Oh, it's just maybe a few months. But according to his analysis, actually, it makes a lot of difference because in terms of sports, what is important at a young age, how do they select those players are basically based on how well they play hockey. And it has a lot to do with physical ability. And at that age, it makes a difference. How many months you have sort of like lived, how many months of growth you have compared to the others who were born in later months of the year. You have, let's say, like 6 months ahead. And that means a lot in terms of your size, in terms of your physical agility. And because of this, you were selected into the team, for example. And then because if you are in that team, you are given opportunities to be trained by professionals. You are given, for example, good facilities. You are given a lot of hours to practice. And then you become better, and then you get selected into sort of like better teams, given more opportunities, given better facilities, better coaching, and you get better and better and better. So that's how you become a successful hockey player. It's because when you were selected, it is not so much because of your ability, but because of your physical maturity or strength at that age. Yeah, and he said that this is true for a lot of sports in the world, not just hockey, ice hockey, because he did the same analysis for that sport in the Czech Republic as well. And I think that's very interesting. Honestly, I'm not sure as an educator, maybe because I used to teach secondary school, I don't really see that effect. The sort of like, when are you born? How does it affect your studies? Because I was born in September, kind of late, but I don't really see that impact per se. But I think that is a very interesting sort of like observation. And then a very interesting thing about that I think I will touch later when we talk about what I learned is the Matthew effect. So I will talk about that later. But then he also talks about one of the many interesting points in this book is about the 10,000 hour rule. Basically, it says in order for you to be very good at something, you need to at least have 10,000 hours of deliberate practice or engagement with that activity for you to become very good. And this is true for like the Beatles, Mozart, and other very good people, even Bill Gates, for example. And I think that is very profound because we used to think that some people have it easier than others because they're smart. But actually, that's not entirely the case because, in order for you to be good, you need to do something a lot. And I feel like that is true for well, like I said, this is my point of view as an educator because I'm not too sure about like other fields. But for example, reading. When we talk about reading, the only way for you to be good in reading or writing, for that matter, is for you to actually read and write. You cannot get better in reading by, for example, singing. It doesn't work like that. And I feel like maybe we sort of like miss that point that we need that time in order to see development or in order to see mastery. And I think this is especially true, for example, when we talk about learning, because some students might, of course, when it comes to learning, everyone has like, okay, maybe after one or two exposure to that, someone would have like learned it already, but others might need more. But even when you are a good learner, you still need a lot of hours engaged in that particular activity or whatever knowledge that is in order for you to be good in it. So I guess this is very important, especially for teachers, in thinking about, when we teach something, it is not enough for us to say, oh, I have already taught this like last week, how come my students are still not getting it, for example. And in fact, knowledge develops as well, because for example, I read this book the first time and when it was first published almost 10 years ago, and I read it again like a few days ago, and I found sort of like a different, not just perspective per se, but more like a deeper understanding, a more nuanced understanding of what Gladwell was trying to say. All right, and other things that he talked about also, which I find very profound, is the factor of your family background, your economy, your economic background, basically. And this reminds me of another study conducted in the 60s by Hart and Risley. So basically, in this, Malcolm Gladwell was saying, he was comparing the life of two people. Robert Oppenheimer who was in charge of the Manhattan Project, basically the project that develops atomic bomb for Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And also Chris Langan, who has an IQ of 195. They are both considered sort of like geniuses, but one is very successful while the other is not successful in the sense that he dropped out of college. He didn't really have a job commensurate with what we would expect with someone with that kind of IQ, basically. So he was looking at how come, he is an outlier, 195 IQ score, but how come he isn't successful? And then he found that for his case, it's actually his family background. He grew up poor. He didn't have a family that would, for example, he got a scholarship to study in university, but because his mother did not sort of like send a letter that says, okay, we will renew like the next term, okay, we will renew the scholarship. So his scholarship got cut. So he didn't have a scholarship anymore. So he dropped out of school and a lot of other things. While Oppenheimer, on the other hand, tried to kill his professor, but he was sent to a psychiatrist. He wasn't even like expelled. So it has to do with your family, not family connection, but how were you raised? So in talking about these two personalities, Gladwell looked at a study conducted by, I can't remember the name now, but this lady conducted an experiment similar to what I said earlier, Hart and Risley. Basically, she went to 12 families, recorded their conversation, basically, and then she found that the middle class, the higher class, they have a different way of communicating to their kids. They see their kids not as someone you only give commands to, like go eat, go sleep, do this, don't do that. They negotiate with their children. They ask their children to assert themselves. They ask their children to challenge them, not challenge authority, but more like, okay, if you do not like what I ask you to do, you can tell me and maybe give suggestions, something like that. They teach their child to sort of like assert themselves when they go to see a dentist. Like, okay, what questions do you have? You can ask questions to the doctor. And then what they call a concerted cultivation. So basically, their child would be sent to classes, sports classes, music classes, and so they see this as something to cultivate the interest of their child. On the other hand, the families from the lower socioeconomic background did not see this as something that something that needs to be cultivated. Okay, my child likes singing. All right. Okay. So I think that this is very profound because this does affect how a child grows up, and I feel like if I were to share my experience a bit. So when I was in Sampurna, I was there for 4 years, and that was my first posting. I did not know what to expect, but I guess a lot of us also do this. We use our own experience because we naturally see things from our perspective, from our experience. So I expect the school to be, I have a certain expectations of the school based on my own schooling experience. But my school, in Sampurna was totally different from what I had experienced back when I was in KL, for example, as a student. Um, and it got me thinking, what I experienced was not the rule, it was an exception. Meaning to say, all the privileges that I had, of course, I didn't know it was a privilege back then when I was a student, but now I do realize they were privileges. But basically, all the privileges that I had set me up or helped me become what I am today. So I came from a very humble background. Like I used to live in PPR, Jalan Samping lagi. So Jalan Samping is like a black area yang apa tu teeming with like gangsterism, drugs, you name it. Kan. But then I have a very sort of like ambitious mother who is very, expects me to do a lot of things, basically. And I went to a very good school. I went to Bukit Bintang Girls School at that time. And I had this, experience, opportunity. That school in 2000 was made into a smart school. We moved to a new complex. We had computers in our classroom. We had TV in our classroom. We had very good teachers. And our co-curricular clubs. We have like all the sports that you can imagine. We have gymnastics. We have fencing. We have judo, aikido, taekwondo, karate do. You want it, you'll have it. Basically, that's the concept, right? And also we were taught to, I wouldn't say challenge authority, no, but we were taught that you can negotiate with authority. Basically, teachers are authority figures. Of course, we have to respect teachers, but you can, sort of like challenge, meaning to say you can question teachers. You can negotiate with your teachers. And the principal that we had at that time, when we had weekly assembly, she would share with us, because she had like a box, it's like a suggestion box where students can drop in whatever feedback or whatever complaints, and she would read it and she would respond immediately. So and this is like the highest authority figure in that school, right? But she was very easily accessible, and I felt like all this experience and it was an all girls school, so all this experience that I had shaped my thinking. And when I sort of like went into the real world, I realized, okay, so like for example, because I went to an all girls school, I just do not understand why. For example, in an organization, the head has to be male and the assistant female. I just don't get it. Like why? Why am I sort of like inferior to you? Yeah, and I question a lot. So people see this as being rebellious, but to me, no. I grew up this way. And then because I did my undergrad in New Zealand, and people said, oh, you got this from New Zealand, but no, I didn't get this from I got it from my school back in KL. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that I sort of like had that experience of concerted cultivation. Not from my family. I went to swimming class. I had taekwondo lessons. I had piano lesson. For from a family from my background, I find that, wow, where did my mom get all the money? So like, really, thank you, mom.
Really
But
privileged.
yes, and also because a lot of my friends, and this is the norm. Of the kids in my school,
Mhm.
a lot of my kids, regardless of their background, like some of my friends who are of like a similar economic background with me, also go to like take piano lessons. So
Mhm.
it's like the norm. So I guess, um, of course, like I didn't grow up to be a swimmer, for example, or taekwondo athlete or
Mhm.
anything like that. No, but I grew up knowing that if I want it, I can get it.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
and also because all of the students back then, we were, I remember we were in standard 6,
Mhm.
UPSR at that time. Lepas tu, the guru besar weekly assembly, she would say, you are an A-star student. You will, apa tu, basically tak adalah macam nak kata you will take over the world, tak. Tapi maksudnya macam, this is your training
Reaffirmation from
ground.
mereka. Mhm.
This is like your training ground. You are going to change the world. So with that kind of expectation, you sort of like grew up with that expectation, like, and you expect nothing of yourself, nothing
Mhm.
less for yourself, right?
Mhm.
So And also because when you meet other people, you know that, you know what, I can tackle this because I had my training back when I was in school. If I can talk directly to my principal, and I was like, what, not even an adult, I can talk to my boss now, for example, or I can talk to my senior colleague, um, and things like that. So I feel like this is very important because now I realize that those things were my privileges at that time. But back in the school, in Sampurna, when I was teaching, that wasn't the case, for example. So curricular activities wise, it's very limited. They do not have that many choices, for example. Hence, we could say, limited exposure, limited experience. And the thing is, the thing about our education system is that, okay lah, at least I used to think at that time lah, kita tak boleh nak kata now we have like school-based assessment, and Kementerian has said we're not ranking schools anymore. But at least back then, schools ranking are based on students' performance, right? So you can say that, of course, the high performing schools will be schools with like good facilities, with kids who are like selected from a certain background. You pace ada certain scores baru boleh masuk sekolah ni, compared to sekolah yang kan kat mana-mana macam tu lah. So I feel like we are already setting up some of our students for failure because of the sort of like standard that we say, okay, everyone should achieve this at this exact same time, regardless of your background and the resources that you have. So I find that, I wouldn't say ridiculous, but I feel like we need to rethink about how we define success in that sense. And also because there are certain things that as teachers or as educators, we have no control of. For example, like I said, my students' economic background, there's nothing I can do about that. I can't change that. But I hope we can see school as a place in which this sort of economic effect can be offset. Meaning to say, regardless of your economic background or your family background, you can be successful here because everyone will be given this kind of resources, this kind of opportunities, and so on. So I feel like that is where the book has really, I would say, sort of like changed my mindset of what success is. Yep. So yeah, so that's the age effect, the family contributes towards your success as well. When you were born, and also your intelligence, of course, has something to do with it. I mean, some research says it contributes as much as 50%. But then the remaining 50% would also depend on what we call nurture, your background, your experience, your opportunities. So I feel like this book reminds me of this quote from The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. It says, when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it. And I feel like that is a very apt description on how one achieves success, because you just cannot do it alone. And I feel like this is where a lot of us make that mistake. We feel like, oh, you are not successful because you are lazy. You do not try hard enough. Other people can succeed. Why can't you? And it is not until I feel when I went to the US to do my master's, and we talk more. I mean, I was exposed to the human rights issues, the issues about black and colored people, and we're talking about sort of like diverse curriculum, like a curriculum that is sensitive to the cultural diversity of the students, which is something that we don't really talk about in Malaysia, because we take it for granted that, oh, we already know other people's culture. Yeah, maybe, but I feel like we need to talk more about it more explicitly, at least. But yeah, so I realized that hard work is not enough. And I remember in one of the courses that I attended, we talk about like teaching kids who are black or people of color, not a different curriculum, but sort of like a different pedagogy. And he was saying to tell kids, like, if you work hard enough, you can do it. It's a lie. Because and this is similar to my own experience when I was in Sampurna. So I was teaching in a secondary school. My students were from I taught from 1 to Form 4. throughout the 4 years that I was there. My students were motivated, they were hardworking, they were resourceful. But if I were to compare them with the students I used to have when I was in KL and Selangor, they are still far behind. And this is where the Matthew effect will come in. But anyway, they're still far behind, and I feel like that is very sad, isn't it? For you to tell someone, you know what, hard work can get you there, but hard work is not enough. How can you close the gap? You're already so far behind, and it is not just your sheer determination that will get you there. You do not have the family background that these students have. You do not have the opportunities that these students have, the resources that they have. So how do you sort of like compete in the same playing field, so to speak? And I feel like we discriminate against the students, saying, "Oh, they don't try hard enough." And because we have that meritocracy system, like you sort of like you get in purely based on your effort. But I feel like that's misleading, isn't it? Because effort alone, your own effort alone, is not enough for you to be wherever it is that you are. And I feel like this book illustrates that very beautifully. He gave Bill Gates as an example. Um, Bill Gates is, of course, smart, but he also came from a rich family background. He went to a private school which had the first, at that time when computers were not like small, like we have today, very big, very expensive, and his school had it. And he had exposure of programming in early teens. He had friends that he can do that with, and he was born at the right time, just before the start of like the technological boom in Silicon Valley. So he had like, like this, the universe conspires in that sense, to allow him to be who he is today. So I feel like for us, and the question is then, how do we create an environment to make sure that everyone can have the same opportunities to succeed? Not just pure hard work, but how do we do it? So going back to the Matthew effect, in which I talk about the gap. So we also learned this in when I was trained as a reading specialist back in New York. We were talking about the effect of reading, or like the reading difficulties. Matthew is basically, we were talking about a biblical verse, actually, that to put it simply, it means that the richer gets richer and the poorer gets poorer. So what it means is that in terms of reading, for example, so let's say if you are able to read at a younger age, let's say age 4, age 3. So by the time you are 6, for example, you must have read, or being read to, at least hundreds of books, maybe, compared to someone who only started to read at age 6. Of course, there are research that would argue that starting reading early isn't necessarily better. That's true. I'm not saying that, if you start reading earlier, you are definitely better, because, like I said, like this book has illustrated, your own personal intelligence or talent is not enough. There are a lot of other factors that would play in. That would contribute to your success or not contribute to your success. But anyway, so because you're a good reader at age 6, right, when you go into school, you sort of like encounter more books. You are more confident, hence you read more. And because you read more, you learn more, not just strategies of reading, but you have more knowledge, so that when you read harder books, you have this like fund of knowledge that would help you to understand this new knowledge. So the effect sort of like multiply, compounded, something like that. Yes. So you only get better. You will not get worse. You will only get better, as opposed to someone who struggles with reading, for example, hence avoid reading. And because you do not read as much, you do not learn as much. Let's say let's say child A can read 10 books. I'm talking about like the small books. Darjah 1 tu 10 books in a week, and then child B can only read 1 book. So by next week, the child might read 20 books, but this child only read 2 books. So we're talking about graph yang satu naik macam ni exponentially, and another one like maybe naik sikit tapi mendata. So the gap widens. So this is the Matthew effect. The gap widens. So similar to my students in Sampurna, they do work hard. They did have some sort of like improvement, but their counterparts in KL or Selangor, for example, are moving ahead. They are not stopping. Oh, okay, I'm gonna wait till you catch up with me, then we can, yeah. No, it doesn't work like that. So these kids get better and better and better, and these kids, okay, get better a bit, but not enough basically. So this gap is actually what the Met we face is about, and this is something that we want to address since the very beginning lah, especially when we talk about special education, because the effects compounded as the child grows older. So I feel like it's the same with opportunities as well, with a lot of other experiences and skills as well. So that's why I feel like with this book, it has really shifted my paradigm on success. I used to feel insulted when people say, "Oh, you're lucky." For example, I feel like, no, I work hard for this. Do you know how hard I work? But now I feel like, okay, I'm not necessarily lucky in the sense like I like you won the lottery, but I'm lucky in the sense that there are things that happen in my life that allow me to have that experiences that I have had.
Probably we have that perspective because we're trying to compare ourselves with those above us. Then we say
Yeah.
that that's why we don't think that we are lucky enough. But if you compare to people who actually below us, kita mungkin akan rasa sebenarnya they actually don't have the similar opportunity as us lah.
Betul, betul, betul. So opportunities is very important.
Okay, I rasa I just nak touch sikit mengenai not reading much tadi.
Not reading
Uh,
much.
Yeah. So,
Uh-huh.
in the framework for understanding poverty from Ruby K. Penn, dia bagi tahu dalam buku tu mengenai perbezaan antara poor society, medium dengan rich society. So kalau macam tadi you cerita
Mm,
mengenai
mm,
how reading books at the early age will affect
mm,
brain development and all.
mm,
In that actually it touches the same thing because they said that in terms of language ability, they compare between the poor, the middle and the richer group. They can
mm,
a different dialect. So macam contohnya
mm,
for poor people, their
mm,
language is more informal. But
mm,
for and middle, probably they have more formal and more vocab for them to talk. So they actually verbatim the conversations and they see what
mm,
kind of word they use. So, but
mhm,
in terms of reading habit ni, sometimes from our engagement pun dengan the poor kids, when I went to PPR hari tu, I rasa dekat pantai kot, I can't see satu rak buku pun dalam rumah yang pertama. Yang kedua, probably
mm,
because they need to
mm,
cari duit lah for the family, right?
uh-uh.
We don't have enough to actually fund the families. That's why I said though we are poor ataupun kita mungkin datang daripada
Mm,
family background, but
mm,
probably our parents have enough means to support our educations. But for some people, they might be the breadwinner of the company, and hence reading is not the priority at the age, and looking for money is most priority lah. I would argue that those people in Sempurna would experience the same thing because they might live with little money to spend on their daily for their daily expenses kan. Yeah.
yes. Mm. Yeah. So that is true as well. So for example, to illustrate the situation, sort of like in Sampurna, at least then lah, now I'm not sure. At least then, back in 2011, 2014, when I was there,
Mm.
newspapers reach one day late. So it's like, it's like you're reading yesterday's news.
Mm.
To illustrate yang macam the flow of information coming in, like we take for granted, of course I would read today's newspaper, what would I read yesterday's newspaper, but in Sampurna they do not have that choice. And how many
Mm.
people subscribe to newspapers, for example? There is one library, and I feel like I don't like libraries in general. Not to say I don't like them, but I love books. But I don't like going to libraries because you are required to be quiet. And with me, when I read books, I want to like lie down and whatever. Yes. So, but then there's only one library. I heard that the selection is good, but there's almost no bookstores. Adalah stationery stores, but it's not the same as bookstores, right? So if we were to talk about reading habit, we can say that it's not really a habit. Like it's not something that people do commonly there, I would argue. Yeah. And like you said, to a lot of them, and we're not just talking about reading, education in general, and I struggle with this when I was teaching, because we have such a set view of like, of course education is good, of course everyone goes to school and goes to university, of course that's our view of education. But to them, not many people can go to university, and not many people can afford it. And what does it take for you to get I feel like that's almost like poignant. For example, like, when we talk English lessons, and we talk about, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a pilot, or I want to be a doctor. But, well, you are in a sastra punya stream. How can you be a doctor? How can you jump to science student in university, for example? So I feel like this mismatch between, I think I want to be this, but nobody is preparing them for that route. I'm not saying nobody's preparing them. It's just that what I mean to say is that, like I said, because they had like a late kickstart. Maybe kids in KL Selangor has been sent to pre-K since age 3, kan, play school since baby, kan, macam tu. So they had a different kind of experience, different kind of skills, compared to, for example, people in Sampurna, kids in Sampurna. And I'm not saying this to say that, Sampurna is not a good place. No, the reason why I mentioned this is because this is a reality not only in Sampurna, but in a lot of, it's not even rural. Sampurna is not even rural. There is Starbucks there. I'm talking like, this is real for a lot of places in Malaysia. And I feel like a lot of us take it for granted, because, hey, we're in KL, we live in big cities. But that's not the case for a lot of people. So when I talk about education, it's hard to even convince them, you know what, you need to stay in school. I know it's going to cost you money, because going to school, they would have, they don't have the system bas sekolah. And this is another thing that I just cannot comprehend. Like, why? But anyway, they don't have system bas sekolah. Public transport non-existent, so they naik private sapu, which will cost them 1 or 2 ringgit per trip. That is expensive. So let's say it's going to take them 4 ringgit per day. That's just the money that their parents might not have. Almost when I was a teacher there, like up to like almost 80-90% of the students are what we would categorize as poor, because they are eligible for apa tu, bantuan, scheme bantuan. So they have to be at a certain, income range in order for them to qualify for those. And 90% of them, 80-90% of them are qualified. So meaning to say, they are like, at a certain level yang shouldn't allow them to have like pay, for example, 4 ringgit per day for just transportation. That is not inclusive. Food, that's not inclusive. Even though our education system is free, tak perlu bayar yuran, tapi dia ada cost. School uniform, takkan nak pakai buku teks mata-mata, pen, kertas, other learning materials kalau you nak buat projects, macam tu.
Okay, kejap Akmal. Kita ada soalan daripada Aisyah Amran. She said, I like the point you made about privileges that we take for granted or we don't realize we had, as opposed to those less fortunate. But critics are saying, if you don't use meritocracy, we actually discriminate, even if we want to correct discrimination or inequality in the first place. What's your thought on this, and how do we strike balance for this? Should we dah tak ada.
Okay, so I feel like that's very interesting. So meritocracy. I feel like at least in our universities, we have a quota system still in place. We have a quota system, and in the US they have something similar, the affirmative action. Of course, it's very controversial, because it says that, my place is taken by someone who doesn't have as high of a score as mine, tapi sebab he is of a different race, he gets to be in that place instead of me, for example. So that could be our thought when we think about quota ataupun meritocracy. Honestly, I'm not sure how it's like in Malaysia. Especially when we talk about our universities. Tapi I can say that this quota system is beneficial for my students in Sempurna because of that Bumi Putra quota kan, Sabah Sarawak quota. They had a chance, they have a chance to go to university sebab, okay, let's say I was in KL, katalah, okay, I got 10 A's, macam tu, but I still didn't get to go to this, let's say I didn't get to go to UIA, even though I wanted to go to UIA, but tiba-tiba this dude from Sarawak got in, and he didn't get 10 A's, so is it like not fair to me? I feel like it's hard for us to judge in that sense, tapi I would say that it definitely benefits like some sections of society, and is it the answer for us, like quota system ke affirmative action? Is it the answer? Honestly, I do not think that it is the answer because it doesn't address the root, the problem, the root cause of this problem. The problem is not that these students will forever not meet the criteria. That's not the problem. The reason why they do not meet the criteria that we said is because of, like I said, all of the lack of resources, lack of opportunities, family background. So if we address those things, if we make sure that we address those things, then we can revisit and say that, okay, you know what, we do not need this quota system anymore. And I think that that's interesting because in Harvard, a few years back, the Asians, I think they were suing Harvard because of that quota system. Because right now they have more Asians than the other sort of like races there. So they were saying like, oh, because of this affirmative action, we are being discriminated. Like we could have gone to Harvard, but because you said there are too many Asians and we cannot go. So, well, I find that very interesting because we tend to view that from us as like, okay, I am this race, as opposed to who's benefiting from that quota system or affirmative action. But then in reverse, what is happening in reverse is happening in Harvard right now. If we were Asian and we wanted to go to Harvard and we couldn't go, we would say, you are discriminating against my heritage as an Asian because I'm not white. Yeah, so I find that like, yeah, interesting. So yeah, I feel like it is not the solution. It is not the solution. It did benefit, and I feel like, yeah, it did some good, but that's not the solution. We need to address the root cause.
I think from policy perspective, any policies that we put in place will always have the trade-off. So we can't satisfy everyone. Um, so yeah, probably the meritocracy, that's the effect of the policy lah. So I think we had very interesting conversations today, and I guess three main points that I managed together from the book is like satu, kita ada physical maturity that actually define success or not. Another one is about the 10-hour rules. Though I read a book, 20-hour rules by Josh Kaufman, yang cerita pasal sebenarnya tak perlu pun 10,000 tapi hanya perlukan 20 hours. But I think the context of the comparison is different. So in terms of it's talking about if you want to become an expert, you need to have that 10,000 hours. If you want to learn something new, you want to acquire a new skill, it can be started with 20 hours rule. So I think it's clarified to another comparison is about the family background, which is crux of our main discussion today. I think we already passed 15 minutes. It turns out. Thank you so much, AKMAR. Any last word to the audience?
Yeah, so I would say that actually this book has sort of like set me up or triggered in me like a quest for sort of like not just what is the value of education, but how do we make sure that everyone can access education equally, sort of. And I would suggest, can I suggest more readings? But I feel like if you're interested in this topic or in this area, some of the books that you can I would like to recommend would be Paul Tough, How Children Succeed. And there's another one, Hart and Risley. So it was a study that was conducted back in the 1960s. So the study conducted by Laurent in this book, yang the 3 classes too, it was almost similar, but it was conducted back in 1960s. It was a much wider study. And and the effects is pretty much the same because they were studying the language, how many words spoken, and this is where the 30 million word gap came from that study, Hard and Risley. Yeah. So thank you everyone, and I really hope that this could spark your interest to actually read the book, because it's really interesting, honestly, and I really hope that it changes your mindset of success, that it is not as simple as, personal achievement, personal hard work. A lot of things play into our success, not just success in the traditional term, but whatever that we do, actually a lot of things need to be in place in order for us to make it happen.
I think thank you so much, AKMAR, for that conclusion. I think I would conclude these sessions by maybe I can't quote the exact ayat in the Quran, the Surah AZIZ. So it mentioned that the inequality will always be there, but why inequality is there? Because Allah actually entrusted us as a Khalifah to make good in this world, to find meanings for our life, and do what we're supposed to do. So if we an educator, do the best that we could so that this gap could be reduced. If we have money, then find a channel so that we can channel our money. So that's why we have zakat, we have wakaf and not. So to make sure that we have the balanced perspective when we live in this world before we berjumpa insyaAllah dekat akhirat. Thank you so much, AKMAR. It is a pleasure to speak to you tonight. InsyaAllah kita bertemu lagi pada sesi akan datang, mungkin bersama AKMAR sekali lagi, dan sampai di sini saja. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi.